Paps, ara fa unes setmanes que ens vas deixar i estic aquí gravant aquesta veu en off. Aquest documental, tal com l'estàvem fent, ja parlava de les històries que quedaven a mig explicar i de com la vida s'interposava, però ara sí que s'hi ha interposat de debò. El cas és que tot aquest temps havia anat desxifrant mica en mica una de les teves històries, com els enigmes i endevinalles que em deixaves per resoldre de petit. Aquella anècdota me la vas explicar per primer cop el 2013, quan vam anar a Venècia i visitàvem la Fundació Peggy Guggenheim. El record que m'explicaves tenia a veure amb en Max Ernst, un dels grans surrealistes, i com vas fer alguna de les teves primeres fotografies durant la seva visita a Beirut a finals dels anys 60. Des de llavors no en vam parlar gaire fins que vam fer el nostre documental a Beirut el 2016. Durant una entrevista me'n vas parlar una estona, però quan, durant un trajecte en cotxe, vaig voler endinsar-me en aquesta història, es va quedar a mitges.
Until my time, when I started chasing Ernst and his wife Dorothy Tanning to photograph them, he was here. I have a photo of him in the lounge of the St. George. One interesting thing, when I came to see them, we ordered coffee and things, or a drink, I think, then. And Ernst says, no, we are invited. He signed the check for the waiter. And the waiter said, what room? I told him, look, don't ask about the room. Keep this chit.
I fins anys després, mai la vam recuperar. Aquests últims anys he tingut la sort de que hem parlat molt i has compartit les teves aventures amb mi.
You got a Nikon F2S, no?
F2S. It's a good camera, my God.
You took some amazing portraits of him.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, what was the entourage like? Because I found some images of, for example, of François Hardy.
No, this was
in Beit Din, no?
in Beit Din.
And there was François, there was Max's wife Dorothea Tanning.
Dorothy Tanning, yes.
George Sehad.
Però com passava amb els enigmes que em feies de petit per donar-me la setmanada, els fragments d'aquests records que comparties amb mi i les fotografies s'havien convertit en petits enigmes en si mateixos als que havíem de donar forma i una coherència si volíem saber la història al complet. I mica en mica va començar una nova aventura. Una que m'ajudaria a entendre com va començar la teva relació amb la fotografia i alhora entendre qui eres quan tenies la meva edat. I ara, ajuntant totes les peces del puzzle, almenys les que tinc a la meva disposició a través de les teves fotos, les nostres converses i gravacions, crec que sé com m'explicaries aquesta història. This particular event happened in 1969, and it involved the likes of Max Ernst, Dorothea Tanning, André Masson, Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, François Hardy, Brigitte and Georges Sehade, Sami Karkavi, and, by some chance, myself, Waddah Faris. Back in the 60s, Lebanon, and Beirut specifically, was a place of boiling cultural appetite. In 1963, Helen Hall and Youssef El-Hall established Gallery 1 in Beirut, one of the first galleries promoting Arab art in the region, under my art direction. During that time, some of the names that showed their work in the gallery were Farid Haddad, Uget Kaland, Dia Zawi, Aref Reyes, and Shafiq Aboud, among many others, names that I would exhibit later on in both my future galleries, Contact and Gallery Faris. Back in those days, in the early 60s, I was also working as a graphic designer for several newspapers and magazines, such as the leading Arab language newspaper An-Nahar, the literary magazines Hiwar and Shir, or doing designs for books and magazines for my friend Ghassan Kanafani. It was in 1969, while spending time with photographer and speleologist Sami Karkabi, that I started dabbling more seriously in photography. Sami, who had lent me a camera every once in a while during years prior, recommended I'd buy my first camera, and I went on to purchase a Nikon F2S. It was a fantastic camera with which I took some of my best shots. But it wasn't a coincidence. It was also during that time that Karkabi was the leading man in the reopening of a cave system known as the Jaita Grotto. To celebrate this reopening, 2 concerts were organized. The first one was by French composer François Bayle, and for the second one, in November of that year, they invited German composer Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. And so, during that fateful long weekend of November in 1969, my love story with photography would change forever. And like many great stories, it all began with a call. One from none other than Brigitte Shehadeh, the Lebanese high society figure that anyone in the art scene had heard of. And, of course, her husband, the poet George Shehadeh. Brigitte had heard of my work as a graphic designer and, more prominently, as an art director in Helen Hall's and Youssef Al-Khal's Gallery 1. We had even met a couple of times in gallery openings. But it was a chat between the Shehadeh couple and Sami Karkabi that sealed the fate of that call. The couple reached out to me and started by asking if I'd be up to photograph Stockhausen's rehearsals and the concert, to which I accepted without any hesitation. And right after that, Brigitte started to talk more discreetly. She told me that they were having some important guests and they wanted to show them the effervescent Lebanese life, and that Sami always spoke highly of me. When I asked for the identity of the people she was referring to, she only said one name, and that was everything I needed to hear to be convinced. Max Ernst. After that, I completely zoned out. I met the Shehadeh couple at the hotel lobby. George apologized for any inconvenience, and then Brigitte grabbed me by the arm and walked me to where Max Ernst and Dorothea Tanning were sitting, and introduced me to them. Dorothea was so excited to be introduced to the local cultural life, while Ernst looked and felt a bit distant at first. Max and Dorothea wanted to go watch a belly dancing show, and I knew the best one in town, Cabaret Fontana. It was there that things began to change between Max and me. During the entire evening, he'd barely spoken a word to me. Maybe Max didn't like my bombastic character, or maybe he expected a quiet guide who'd just show them around and that's it. In Cabaret Fontana, Max kept saying how he'd like to learn how to dance like those women, and I made it happen. And from then on, Max's attitude shifted, and the spark of a new and unlikely friendship between the two of us began. And then Max Ernst danced the night away with his newfound instructor. The following morning, we met again in the hotel's lobby, and like with all first-time visitors, we went to Hamra. There we went to a money exchange venue and decided to start our tour. And so I began by taking them to the small Al-Nourieh chapel, a landmark that used to be hidden in the small streets of downtown Beirut. After that, we decided to make our way through the old streets of the city and get lost there. We then headed to Basta district, where I wanted to show them the great antique shops of the area. And from there to the old souks, the vegetable and fruit markets in downtown Beirut. Max and Dorothea were slowly but steadily falling in love with the city. It was then that Brigitte reminded us all that we had to go back to their place for lunch. George was waiting. There were Calder's pieces hanging from the ceiling, Joan Mirós works on the walls. It was like a private museum of international modern art. I was overwhelmed by such a collection, but even more so by the fact that Max Ernst was in front of me enjoying those works and talking about them with George. They were all having such an amazing time, and I was portraying everything through the lens of my camera. To me, it was like a dream come true. But it was during that dreamlike sequence that Brigitte brought me back to reality, reminding me of our original deal to photograph the rehearsals and the main event the following day. That was a problem. I had promised Max and Dorothea I'd show them around the ruins in Byblos in the morning, but to every problem there is a solution. And so, the next day, I made my way to Byblos, making sure to get there before the group arrived. And when they got there was a new member in the party, the great André Masson, another great surrealist painter and close friends with Ernst and Tanning. I then took a quick look at the time and started taking them around the ruins. After a while, I realized I had to head to Jaita. I apologized for leaving, hopped on the car, and left. Once there, the rehearsals began. And then it was showtime. The concert was a success, but that meant one thing, that the trip was coming to an end. The group decided to do one final outing and meet for lunch at Beit Din. As usual with that special group, I got there with plenty of time before the group's arrival and met with Suzanne Al-Assir, the host for the day. She showed me around and how everything was being set for the visit and so, until finally a first small group arrived. But it wasn't the group I'd been spending days with. It was a younger one, and at the center of it was the French superstar Françoise Hardy. Shortly after, Ernst, Tanning, Masson, and the rest of the crew arrived and the party began. Everyone seemed to be having a great time, all but Ernst. For a moment, in the middle of that beautiful scenery, Ernst looked and felt distant again. Looking back, I realized he was coming to terms with the fact that that dream he'd been living for a few days was coming to an end. When that long lunch was over, the whole group headed back to Beirut, making a short stop at Pierre and May Khouri's home in Yarzeh, just outside the city. And after that, back to headquarters at the St. George's Hotel. I offered to accompany the group to the airport the next day, and so I did. But first, I had to take them out one last time for a little bite, and so we went to one of my favorite spots, Al Rauda Cafe. And then the group left back to France, and I went back to living my life. That was until a few weeks later, when a package from France was delivered to me. I didn't recognize the sender's name, so I left it there for a couple of days. Then, out of curiosity, one day I finally opened it, and there it was, a gift from my unlikely new friends.
Havent resolt aquest enigma, només ens queda seguir la nostra aventura.
There was a time in this land when our lives had the feel and quality of realized dreams. The places, the persons that inhabited them generated a concert of endearing, chaotic harmony and creativity that still inhibit and mark our memory. In that pre-digital time, precisely in 1969, when I was dabbling in painting, I acquired my first owned camera, and a new relationship developed instantly between that seductive, dreamlike quality that engulfed all aspects of our lives then and my intense awareness of it. For without any professional preparation or objective for that matter, I had embarked on an unconscious and undisciplined diary-style creativity of recording on film. The events, the places, and the persona that surrounded me in Beirut and in points beyond in that little paradise